So today we're going to hear from the Design Lab, which are made of its co-directors, Jarrett and Peter Wong. Chris is a professor of architecture and co-director of the Design Lab. He's also president of the ARCC. And he also served as the school's director from 2009 to 2000. He holds a Master of Science in Architecture from Columbia and a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Oregon. His research focuses on the mutually constructive relationship between the environment and culture. Peter Wong is an associate professor and he teaches architectural design, history, and theory, and he's been here since 1988. That's incredible. Wow. He's also the coordinator of the third-year studio these days. He received degrees from the University of Washington and the University of Pennsylvania. He and I are pen pals in that way. He's also a licensed architect in the states of Pennsylvania and North Carolina. His current research investigates spatial perception in domestic interior realms, utilizing eye tracking hardware and software to reveal areas of visual attention in housing environments. So the Design Lab, all of that put together, was established in 2015 as a design research space in the School of Architecture as an extension of the school's curricular and community research efforts. Design Lab is a venue where faculty and students collaborate on innovative design issues that aim to advance contemporary professional, theoretical, and technical problems facing architecture today. Design Lab is supported by research funds and grants, special collaborations that afford a variety of investigative projects, from housing to school design, and from competitive research to creative problems. A large part of its efforts is to generate design ingenuity of these creative works, such as competitions, lab projects, and published writing, and by allowing lead faculty and student assistants to collaborate in ways that combine the school's research and educational agenda. With that, I welcome the Design Lab, Chris and Peter. Is it still forest floor and more?
It is. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jonathan. Very good. So the Design Lab is located 25 minutes southwest of Stores via light rail at the Du Bois Center. So located in the first ward in the heart of Center City, Design Lab is situated within the context of Charlotte, which is to say, for us in the Design Lab, to be in the lab is to be in the city, and we engage it as part of the culture of the Design Lab, from coffees and cheese sandwiches at 7th Street Market to exhibitions and film series at the Beckler, to stouts at Michael Alexander's, or conversations with members of the board of the Foundation of the Carolinas.
And I'm like, I didn't know if he was gonna actually go there. I thought he's probably not just gonna walk up to her and try and,
Yeah, to Tostadas at Velvet Taco and walks around Romare Beaverly Park. So being in the city, in essence, is an integral part of the Design Lab. Designed by Kieran Timberlake Architects in partnership with Gant Huberman, whose office was located just a few blocks away from here. The Du Bois Center opened in 2010, and from the beginning, 13 years ago, the School of Architecture has run studios, seminars, labs, and events on the 10th floor between students, faculty, and professionals. The Du Bois Center is also home to SoA's Master of Urban Design program, City Building Lab, and the college's Projective Eye Gallery. So there's a lot going on over there. The Design Lab is located at the southeast corner of the 10th floor at a substantial cantilever where the forces of gravity are keenly felt daily. The Design Lab has employed over 20 students over the last 6 years to help us think through a series of design research questions and methods of inquiry as it relates to space, perception, surface, and materiality. The images here illustrate the spirit of the lab and the conditions we've established for doing creative work, surrounded by books, computers, trace paper, cutting mats and X-Acto blades, basswood sheets and strips, chipboard and foam core, 5 types of glue, old models, new models, a fridge, microwave, coffee maker, and a toaster, and most importantly, each other. Design Lab was established in 2015 as a design research lab in the SoA. The mission of the lab is to empower design as an agent of change to advance contemporary issues in architecture. We combine both theoretical and applied knowledge to produce innovative and speculative work. The Design Lab invites students to collaborate with faculty on design research-based projects, as we'll share momentarily. And the lab pursues research funds, grants, and professional collaborations. The Design Lab thinks of itself as trying to extend the school's design focus and curricular and community outreach efforts. Design Lab has been the recipient of awards from the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture, AIA Charlotte, AIA North Carolina, and AIA New York. We have a deep respect and appreciation for our ongoing collaborations with the Fab Lab and past collaborations with AIA Charlotte and the Housing Studio. Predominant research areas of the Design Lab are affordability, modularity, sustainable materials, and spatial perception. These research subjects have been tested in the design of micro-modular housing, work, live, and multifamily housing and school design. The projects we have pursued afford us the opportunity to explore different building materials, including cross-laminated timber, pressed steel plate, recycled plastics, and more recently, micromaterials. The research interest of the Design Lab is tested with design projects that span between Charlotte and New York, Vancouver and Berlin, Milan, Tokyo, and Durban, among others. State, national, and international design competitions have often served as the venue for exploring and testing our ideas and research questions. So I'm going to go through now a few descriptions of some of the projects as a kind of backdrop to a little bit more in-depth view of a couple of projects that Peter will talk about. The research that drives residents at work, or RAW, is what we refer to as flexible economics, where traditional market rate models of development are financially and spatially rearranged, flipped, and folded to drive greater degrees of social, demographic, and economic diversity. We envisioned RAW as a counter project to the ill effects of gentrification and homogenization run amok in Charlotte and cities across the US. Our research on flexible economics is tested in a design proposal for a mixed-use residential, industrial, urban community that, one, permits families to lease backyard rooms while promoting an alley urbanism composed of small-scale garage-like units. Two, permits small business owners the option to lease their elevated lofts above a commons terrace as part of empowering a maker network of small businesses along an historic industrial corridor south of downtown Charlotte. Our research on lightweight pressure forming metal through stamping and tooling process explored, let's see here, this pressing matters, yeah. So our research on lightweight pressure forming metal through stamping and tooling process is explored and tested in the project Pressing Matters. Sheet metal is lighter and more form flexible than cold rolled W or I-flange steel, with low energy demands, relatively speaking, in both manufacturing and transportation, with greater degrees of lateral resistance. Pressing Matters exports methods of blanking, stamping, drawing, and piercing used in the automotive industry for the design of customized unitized metallic frames composed of double-layered skin floor plates and continuous vertical supports. So in contrast to the universalizing order of the modern steel frame that shaped 20th century construction and gave rise to an increasing homogeneous built environment, Pressing Matters examines the potential for a more differentiated, individualized, softer, smoother, and more subtle use of steel in architecture. Out of Sight examines the provision and notion of affordability in the city. This project explores the idea that small-scale design can lead to large-scale effects. Here, the approach focuses on the design of a 280 square foot unit that populates different urban site conditions, allowing familiar but also alternative building types to emerge. The basic L-shaped configuration of each housing unit in this proposal is predicated on a perception of space that is out of view or out of sight. The visual effect expands the impression of the interior beyond normal expectations and avoids container-like character typical of most micro-housing models. As such, Out of Sight promotes perceived space over square footage, indeterminate room limits over confined boundaries, And 3, occupation of desirable places to live in the city by virtue of its adaptive characteristics. The conceptual strategy is demonstrated in 3 New York urban conditions that test the viability of the system. As a 12-story urban corner, as a 5-story urban townhouse, and as a multi-layered horizontal mat building seen here in the East River. Research on the indigenous plank house inhabited by the Coast Salish peoples of the Pacific Northwest unveils a social and spatial construct defined by its flexibility, linearity, adaptability, and free plan. These indigenous houses included textile partitions and decorated columns, and drove the design of a contemporary low-rise affordable housing project in Vancouver. A linear, flexible, adjustable wall serves to accommodate a range of living, working, and subleasing conditions, able to adapt to changing lifestyles and economic circumstances. Research on Danish barns and traditional farming practices of the Øresund region outside of central Copenhagen drives an environmental design model for a new primary school founded on the principles of learning by seeing and learning by doing. Central to the research was the study of cross-laminated timber panels made of Norway spruce to enable column-free floor plans for maximum adaptability. Traditional classrooms have been transformed into collaborative child-scaled makerspaces, or what we call plyvillions. The makerspaces are composed of open daylit rooms offering framed local views of edible fields and free play areas. Below ground are dark cavernous quiet spaces with nooks, cubbies, and compartments for day packs and coats, offering children personal space to read a book, write a story, or take a nap. Shared educational, social, and administrative functions are collected in a high-tech tower, or what we call a skyscraper, where digital tools are promoted to advance child's education while providing children panoramic or global views of the city to better understand Copenhagen and its place in the natural world. The makerspaces and tower are connected through a field condition conducive to farming practices and play, and 2 meters below grade is a geothermal loop to move heat to and from the plywood pavilions. Here, D-School is proposed as the new unschool. Inspired by Gordon Matta Clark's fake estates that mapped odd lot sizes due to the surveying errors in New York's 5 boroughs, or Atelier Bow Wow's pet architecture account of small, almost impossible to build remnant sites in Tokyo, now thriving as ramen bars, nail salons, and single-person wide convenience stores. In the same spirit of these forlorn spaces, Mod Pod's recognize the inherent constraints of infill sites by capitalizing on their unique properties and locale. Micro-modular housing examined prefabrication and assembly systems. Much of this work has been influenced by Peter's ongoing research in spatial perception, employing eye tracking techniques to study how people perceive, understand, and use space, which we will see in a bit more detail in a few minutes. The DesignLab is also the source of design scholarship. Examples here include the publication of peer-reviewed papers that examine, for example, on the left, notions of vague space, that is, spaces which move beyond our field of view, across wall planes and behind edges, spaces that have no apparent closure. And on the right, spatial and constructional analyses of 7 Alexander houses in Coachella Valley, designed by architect Donald Wexler in the early 1960s, each a modest 400 square foot house composed entirely of all steel prefabricated components and surfaces that are durable, lightweight, easily transportable, low maintenance, and dimensionally economical. So we're going to segue now and talk about 2 projects from the DesignLab with a little bit more detail about each of them. So Peter.
Very good, Chris. That was a nice summary of the things that we've been trying to do in the lab. I think just to reiterate, it's been important to have the students' assistants involved. They've been, of course, the kind of backbone of a lot of the investigations that we've done. And also one of the foci of the lab is to see that projects, design projects, which we loosely try to define as design research, maybe different than applied or intellectual research, act as the vehicles that allow us to study this. So we would like to say that we're expert at something. And at the same time, we feel like there's expertise out there that are very important from a contemporary point of view with regard to architecture today, particularly climate crisis, affordability, as well as a kind of perceptual research that's taking advantage of new digital hardware and software, that we feel the architectural design project, in a different way than in the past, has allowed us to investigate an integrated approach. And so maybe this is a lesson where for our students, why the integrated project is such an important experience is because we as composers, maybe conductors of the orchestra of architecture, have to see the project as the place that this is practiced. And this is a difficult thing to do, particularly if you are an undergraduate, even a graduate student, to bring together in fashion all of these different components that architecture has to offer. That's a difficult thing to juggle. And so I think our lab tries to use the design project as a way of exposing the possibilities of those. So for example, in this one project, we're going to talk about two projects, the forest floor, and this is the more part. Against the Grain was a competition that was called for timber in the city, which is, now a kind of common concern and issue with regard to kind of high carbon steel and concrete construction. And so this project tested the idea that mass timber, namely CLT panels, which we have now seen constructed in many different cities, is a viable means of reducing the kind of carbon footprint, and else, as well as banking carbon in an urban environment. And at the same time, we feel that that current practice is somewhat stagnant already, even though it's new. The modularity of it, the restrictions on the panel sizes and the geometry. We wanted to strike a balance between its expressive qualities and its structural capabilities. And so we sought to do that in two different ways. One, with the vertical surface and its ability to bear weight, and then also the horizontal span and its ability to cover a field condition in the horizontal dimension. The project competition we took on our own terms. We redefined it as a series of affordable units alongside the required athletic club and also early childhood development center. So what you'll see here is the residential section as a kind of slab building up against the Manhattan-Queensboro Bridge. This is in New York. And then also the low scale horizontal structure, which utilizes CLT in a different way. So the three things were sustainability through the material use, also affordability, and you'll see that in different size units that we've designed, and also the challenge with the material itself, and trying to, I think, upend a bit and challenge the way CLT is commonly used. And so in this particular case, looking at the vertical on the right, as well as its horizontal use on the left, we attempted to accept the standard panelized condition and also think about it as the potential for it to be carved in a different way. That the panel conditions can span and at the same time emit light on its horizontal surface. And we played around with different kinds of patterns for the horizontal health clinic and also early childhood development center to make a kind of canopied roof that utilized this heavy timber system with CLT planking on top. There's a kind of slight reference to the way cellulose is formed, but in the end, that's only a pure analogical relationship. We wanted to even dive a little bit deeper into that by its construction purposes. So the panelization is familiar and at the same time kind of cuts across the grain of contemporary current CLT practice. And the same was true with the way we thought about the load-bearing capabilities of the slab structure, which demanded a kind of 6-level vertical integrity. So these were used as party walls, as well as an outside skin system that's facing to the south that could be also cut in a similar way to create the balconies and the kind of vertical sun screens for the apartment units. The units themselves is part of the affordability issue. We presented 5 different scaled and sized units. They're based on a kind of single loaded corridor model where units could be single flats or double multi-level units depending on the size. They're a little bit difficult to read, so let's see if I have another image. But they're based on a kind of 16-foot module that then gets doubled with a center core stair. So it has some homage to Robin Hood Gardens in a different context by the Smithsons, trying to utilize that multi-leveled front to back kind of ventilation capability, so that you're not just it's very different than the apartments that we see today built in Charlotte, where you have a single corridor in the back, pretty much dark, then bathrooms, kitchens, then all living spaces on a single exposed wall. And so we were trying to utilize the historical examples by the Smithsons to kind of try to recover that. So that was in that particular project. That was a mention award out of, I think it was around 70 to 100 different projects. This is the most recent project completed for the Berlin Affordable Housing Competition at the end of 2021, I guess, beginning of 2022. This was an interesting project. You think about the city of Berlin. It's also its immigrant and refugee population, in conjunction with, of course, its history post-war. These two images show you the kind of perimeter block scheme before the Allied bombing, and then 10 years after, you can begin to get a sense of the overall block destruction and clearing that occurred. And what that cleared the way for, of course, as Berlin became divided, was the new Soviet model, the new international architecture model of building Europe, and the Soviets probably took that on in full extent. So we see basically the Corbusian tower, the kind of Villa Radius, in that sense, the use of the land And many of the sites in Berlin still exist that way. We did a survey, and the dark areas indicate both in West and East Berlin, more on the east, the former east, the towers and slabs that were utilizing that model. And the idea was to, well, how do you increase the density in Berlin? Perhaps using a different model, but at the same time taking advantage of that leftover space, which was typically left for parks and greenery under the positive kind of Corbusian manifesto, but ended up being parking lots. So the idea for the forest floor was to take the available land, we have the models here also, that are adjacent to these 1950s post-war modernist buildings, social housing buildings, and to populate the areas between to make a different kind of habitat that were low scale mass timber structures. So what you'll see here is this is the demonstration block in this location right here on the former east side, with the spree moving through. And the grid of columns represents the kind of pattern of the housing model, which is based on a 16 by 45 foot module utilizing CLT and also heavy timber construction. And so this is the floor that's referred to, and building the new kind of figure ground amongst the existing towers was the goal. And so this shows how that may occur with some details of the sketch kind of diagram of the model units that would then occur of that, all CLT. Part of the research, as Chris mentioned before, was with eye tracking. And what the research, that kind of psychoneural research involves there is allowing us to understand these efficient spaces in a different way with regard to their expandability, their limitlessness in the field of view. And the way these are designed, that also is facilitated by the construction system using CLT, is the idea that spaces beyond our field of view, what are the spaces that are out of sight, which we referred to in the earlier project, are in fact a means of inciting an expanding interior that on a psychological level allows us to inhabit smaller spaces in a more expansive way. That is it possible through visual perception, through the kind of health of our mind, to think about small spaces acceptable if we design them in a way that makes them larger. And so eye tracking allows us to assess that. We don't know whether or not people are actually thinking that the spaces feel larger, but we know that where they're looking indicates that there is an interest. And I think there's further research that we need to do, both with less static tools, such as looking at an image, but also gammatic skin response and pupil dilation also indicates a certain degree of excitation, which maybe gives us a better sense of what we are thinking. But in terms of what we're perceiving, we tend to look to areas that are beyond the view and boundaries of the room. And so this has great impact on architecture, where we move our eyes, which is saccade space, where we are our greatest points of interest in a scene. Our view as we see a scene to that first fixation, like our first area of interest, is also very interesting. And then how many times and in what duration does our eye come back to the same place that we've already visited? These are the parameters of the eye tracking researcher. And we're trying to use that in a preliminary way to talk about these micro units and how they may seem like.
You made it all the way.
I made it all the way. I just have 2 more slides, I think.
We'll just restart that. No, I'll just start from.
So the units were designed with similar effect. The planar quality of the architecture allows us to capture this kind of indefinite use of space by the way, we don't make punched openings so that rooms are cells, but they're kind of implied openings with the use of window walls and also opaque heavy timber walls. So these are the different unit sizes, very similar to the last project. We can go into detail, but maybe we can just say that for discussion. These are the kind of diagrammatic model that shows us how the forest floor operates. And then I think you can't really see it in this photograph, but we have the model here to show you the system, but at the same time, random ability to create a diversity of units within that particular system. So right now you're seeing 2 levels of that along with the courtyards. So as Michael Green says, we're at a unique moment in architecture and building engineering history when shifting world needs has asked us to question some of the fundamentals of how we have built for the last century and how we build in the next. Wood is the most significant building material we use today that is grown by the sun. When harvested responsibly, wood is arguably one of the best tools architects and engineers have for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and storing carbon in our buildings. I think that, looking at housing as a kind of programmatic type allows us to think about the extensive use of that. And I think at the same time, the issue of affordability and the scale of this housing, the means at which diverse populations and social economic groups can access those is also important, in addition to the environmental issues that are afforded by the kind of ecological use of these materials. So with that, we can open it up to questions. I will monitor the chat.
Yeah, there's like 7 comments, but they don't show up on your laptop, so you have to do it.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
What's next for you guys?
Anything come to mind? What's next? Well, we are finishing the model of the project we did in Tokyo. It's going to do it in December. And we're back in the end of this month. So we're working on a model right now. Jesse Roman is our RA working with us this semester. And we're also working on another housing project in SoA. Looking at the current block typology. I think the one thing also to iterate in the bigger picture, I think the design lab is trying to trying to be situated somewhere between the academy and practice. And part of that goal is a function of, like, meeting that goal, it's a function of being where we are. But also to we sort of operate the lab as a kind of atelier and a small practice, giving students exposure to that, which is a little different than the way they might operate in the studio environment. So I think maybe there's a discussion with respect to the labs in the School of Architecture or the college at large, and how this is sort of situated in relation to different kinds of labs. That the school has, and I don't know if that draws us any questions, but I'm just I'm sort of throwing that out there.
Because I can sort of maybe further that, so if you're, the benefit of being in academia is that you can do eye tracking and all of these things that a client might not necessarily pay for and pursue an actual built project. So how do you find the balance, I guess, between kind of the more experimental work and the practice side of things?
I mean, in many ways, I would argue our projects are fairly practical. If that's sort of the question, or the question is more about how to implement the work in terms of the built environment, like how to move it from the lab to the city itself, which is say a partner, a developer, partner, and that sort of thing. And we just sort of we've not had the opportunities, but while we do position it both having an experimental dimension, but also having the practical dimension, in the sense that a lot of these projects look like they could be built, as an example. So I don't know if that teases the question.
I was thinking something similar. I've known you both long enough that you'll forgive my. I just feel like it's, for me, and I'm talking in the meta level.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot we can talk, the design stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're talking about the design stuff or like sort of the idea of the lab. I'm about to talk about the idea of the lab.
Sure.
It just seems trapped in the ARCC, ACSA kind of, forgive me, jargon of justifying it. I'd like to see it go off the rails a little bit, because there's some good design work going on, and it feels a little bit defensive, like sort of rooting it in what we now consider to be the disciplined venues of architectural research. And can it go off the rails a little bit as a true design lab? Or am I just cynical and too far out of the mainstream? Do you know what I mean? Or no?
I don't.
You know,
What do you mean go off the rails?
more experimental.
Yeah.
And I don't know, there's just a lot of, I mean, in my point in my career, I'm tired of the ACSA, ARCC. Just the way that we have to talk about architectural research. I want to light some fires. So maybe it's not relevant. But with all of it, I can start to throw that in there. You even, am I even making sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of other people that have either both legs in academia,
Right.
trying to do sort of design research, or have a leg in both worlds, that are doing so-called more
Like,
experimental
why does this
work.
stuff have to be peer reviewed?
Most of it, I mean, peer review is this is an extension of it's a way of disseminating the work, and sharing the work through the venues that are out there. I don't think I mean, I don't think in our mind it's justifying it per se, if that's what you need. But for us to sort of, for us to reflect on it and move it into scholarship in as much as that we prepare an organized paper around it is part of what we see. It's just another step in the process of doing the work.
Maybe line is maybe going wide in the area of affordability because, for example, I come from a country where nowadays young generation in Korea cannot afford a house even though they can work entire life. So the affordability, affordable housing for new generation in Korea in particular is very hot
Yeah.
issue. The current president, he won the president because they said I'm gonna make the house more affordable. So based on your presentation, I see maybe two tactics that we are trying to do. One is the modularity. They can maybe bring into the affordable aspect, and the second is the material usage. But then like a modular in design, that makes sense. But when it comes to construction, let's say like a TLT in shared construction, like easy prefab or so I want to hear more about maybe like an actual path to get to the affordability through the modular and then TLT or timber. And the second thing is that what if you are engaged with a philanthropic developer, let's say in Korea, who want to build up the housing, that's your pitch, right?
She's gonna make the introduction.
It's not.
for us. It's leading up to that. Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, I think that would be an interesting step, you know. I think there's definitely much more, I don't know, collaborations with industry. So in order to custom fabricate CLT panels, I think the process has to also be looked at, you know. So there's no waste just by cutting off drops from a rectilinear panel. So how do you do that, you know? And how do you do it with the aid of, you know, computer controlled devices, right? And I think that that's one of the things that has kept us not wild, because we think that there's enough of that already being done, you know. Just look how many pavilions or, you know, pop-up temporary exhibits there are that test new materials, but they don't do so,
That's not what
I think, in a way that's, you know, that's going to be sustainable. So I think the best model for us was, how do you subvert a current conventional system, you know? And that for us is kind of wild in a different way. So maybe I don't understand what you mean by wild.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I can articulate either. It just, you know, just thinking intellectually, like, where does this lab want to be positioned? And I think, you know, Liz was bringing it up too. So I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Like, and you know, I don't know, I'm just sort of.
Yeah, I like how you provoked
But
us.
I'm not talking about doing some kind of pavilion.
Yeah,
I think it's about like, how much is it? Because I think some of these things we know. And it's just sort of like there are bigger political forces or industry forces that are sort of out of our control.
mhm.
And what can a lab of our scale contribute? So maybe it can contribute, you know, it's just sort of like, where's it fall on the line of being practical and theoretical?
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question. And if I have the answer, I would tell you, but it's really more of a question of, do we flirt with things that are really so much bigger than what we can contribute to? Like CLT is just, it's so expensive. Just
Yeah, right now.
right now, like in this country.
Yeah.
Which is not even you know, just like at the store, you know.
Yeah.
So what can you know, how can a lab in a school like this position itself?
So, I mean, I think to the extent that you are positioning it between academia and the industry, I guess my first question would be, like, to what extent are technical consultants coming into play? I mean, because you're using eye tracking, but you're not eye tracking computer scientists or architects. You talk about CLT, you use these technologies, but I didn't hear about a consultant that could actually help bring new forms of knowledge to the evidence. I mean, the evidence that you make is within the wheelhouse of an architect. And I think maybe, Thomas, that's what you're kind of saying, is that like the evidence that the research produces is predictable within the technical capacities of an architect. And that somehow, and I don't know, maybe, you know, this point about affordability brings in an economic technicality to it, where there's new forms of evidence through proving that something is cheaper, or through like life cycle analyses, which would prove that it's, you know, not less than carbon or something. But where do you see the lack of going in terms of sort of production of knowledge beyond having other, I mean, I fall into the realm of like doing peer review as well, obviously, and pavilions.
Yeah.
Things that get thrown away.
Sorry, I didn't mean.
No, I 100% get it. But I think part of what I'm, in terms of the way I position my lab and my work, is that that it becomes about producing evidence that can be pointed to as knowledge. I don't know, like, where do you all feel about that?
Well, you're also claiming that there needs to be more experts kind of involved, like whether or not they're.
Or maybe just multidisciplinary work.
Yeah.
Architects.
I think that
themselves.
We've had, you know, I've been working with John Jarrett on the eye tracking, and he's not really a designer. He's very good at chugging numbers and maybe schooling us about how we can't make these larger claims about design because we just don't know, right? So he's a real hardcore researcher in the sense that he cannot claim things that we haven't proven through the use of data. So as a designer, he has shortcomings that way, but we can rely on his expertise with, you know, probability theory and things like that. He's really good at that, and just keeping us straight. So we have to work with them, and we have. I think on the affordability side, it may not be as much about, it is about cost, but I think also it has to do about, in America, about affordability policy. And, you know, maybe we need to partner with people who understand that kind of formula a little bit better, because I think you can, you know, in North Carolina, it's really difficult, but places like in the Northeast where you're mandated to have certain amounts of affordable units, those are dollar, you're playing with dollars, other people's money, in order to make those affordable. It's not the architecture is that cheap, right? It's still expensive architecture, but through programs, you're able to offer federal assistance. So I think we have to figure out how to utilize those in projects like this, I think, too. But I think you're right. I think the expertise
was a good, like, it was a nice, easy way for architects to kind of operate under that sort of like guise. Because you could sort of like, you get the scorecard, and you could like, even just with a speculative design, there's nothing wrong with speculation, but it at least gives a framework for like how you can kind of score things, and you can show the ratio, show your score. And, you know, sort of fake it out. Yeah, and so I just wondered, just within the issues that you're working with, where there are sort of technical aspects that can be bolstered, and the way that, I don't know, like, the role of the architect is to bring people together who would not normally work.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, there's maybe lots of roles, but that's the way I've always seen sort of my role in research as a designer, and our ability to communicate things that, you know, as you said, your colleagues really good at crunching numbers, but to actually explain that through visual means or in a way that it's understandable, why it's beneficial as a part of the process.
For example, with CLT, we've learned that, it's really not a great load bearing material, even though we want it to be, because it has this really nice sharp, house of cards quality to it, where you can, but really they want the flexibility of the plan and the ability to chase systems and services through a columnar structure. So generally CLT is paired with a mass timber tectonic system. So this is something we were trying to do with this one in this particular case, to see it as a series of columns that then would be, covered in canopy with CLT planking. But so that's to have a CLT kind of expert there to talk to, and also just the whole code thing. This is still relatively new, particularly for Charlotte. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of also the data and also design speculations, I think the designers or architects should be able to speculate something based on the data. Right? So
Yeah.
for example, your eye tracking data, subcave speed may allude something, right? The speed, the depth metrics.
Yeah.
They are your measurement of the cave. So I think it's okay, we bring people who is good at numbers, punching numbers, but we should be able to know how to use the data
Yeah.
to inform the design. Then the design variables start to be organized. Otherwise, you don't know because what variables got impacted what. Okay?
I think, in this particular case, to use it as a device so that we can know if our general design is it tracking us in those particular areas, is a way to use that tool, outside of its quantitative, number crunching aspects. So
I really find the stuff they do with hospital rooms and,
it's pretty-
that stuff is
Yeah.
like really incredible. I don't know how it works from the kind of design I think that you like, the sort of aesthetic dimension.
Yeah.
Do you really see that translation?
I mean, I think it's different because you're dealing with equipment, right? And you're talking about the welfare of the patient, right? Or are you talking about
What
the
type of, when they-
efficiency of the doctors and
yeah, I mean, like they redesign hospital
Yeah.
rooms based on,
wayfinding? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that stuff is sort of amazing, that you can optimize healthcare.
Mhm.
But with the kind of the design that I think you're interested in, I'm wondering how it translates into an aesthetic dimension.
Yeah. Or the question itself is the aesthetic dimension worth enough or valued enough?
Oh, no, it's worth enough, but is it something that we're gonna use that kind of data to generate?
Well, or does that aesthetic dimension actually then start to push new fabrication processes that do eliminate waste or do sort of push CLT beyond sort of convention that we think we're locked into?
You're not gonna answer.
I don't have it. I don't know.
I'm really
I thought it
curious.
was an open question. I
No,
don't know
I'm
if I
really,
have
I'm
an
really,
answer to it.
I'm sincerely curious.
Yeah. Well, I think it does open up the question of, and Kenny's dealt with this with eye tracking, but also the kind of mobility issue where they're trying to simulate reality more. Where are your eyes moving as somebody comes down the hallway opposite of you in a pandemic situation, I mean, that's kind of interesting. And I don't know how it relates to the physical aspects of the architecture, except for maybe material surfaces and slickness and,
Those are space.
yeah.
I mean, we speculate that, like, bringing the apertures, inclusion of
Yeah.
apertures, so changing the color of the interiors, or
Yeah.
aspect ratio, the volume,
Yeah.
impact the human response.
Yeah.
It's could be predicted by something, right?
Yeah.
The eyes is more sensitive
Right.
before we make the actions.
Yeah.
So that's like the physical aspect, right? So, yeah. I mean, there are people who are dealing with like this, like the psychology and physical aspects. So
But the proportion of the space.
Yeah, like there's been studies on ceiling heights as well, and I think this one has to do primarily now with apertures. And so there's like a whole, you have to approach it, you would approach it categorically, you know, like floors dropping away, etc. And we can look at it in terms of spatial types, hallways versus, you know, stairwells. That the question is how that body of research maybe should be in place already, but I don't think there's much of it. So like to do a whole encyclopedic kind of catalog, a kind of Muthazius English house kind of volume of eye tracking would be really kind of cool. I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime, but it'd be a cool project to work on. So identifying that taxonomy would be, I think, maybe a next step too. It's kind of what we're suggesting. Good, thank you for the comments. It made us think a little bit further.
Yeah, the aspect ratios and proportions of space,
Yeah,
that starts to make sense
Yeah.
more than, I mean, I get apertures, but
Yeah.
I feel like apertures is sort of like telling us that the sun's in the south, like, we're
Yeah.
gonna look at the aperture.
that, yeah,
But,
obvious research.
but when like it starts to be about proportions, that I think starts to
Yeah,
get
it's interesting.
more spatial.
The luminous factor, like sunlight.
Sunlight is a big factor.
Perceive the value,
Yeah.
so they're all important.
Because they still don't understand that it might not just be the shape, but it's the contrast between light and dark. And that is, for eye tracking researchers, that has been like a kind of question of debate, you know. Do our eyes just go there because there's a difference and that we see those differences quicker? Kind of in an involuntary way, as opposed to looking for the most beautiful aperture.
Right.
So. But I think that also leads to, well, if you can create those contrasts just between edges, then if that allows it to be a kind of signifier for then spaces beyond, like through a frame, then that would be the kind of next step of like intent, right? Would be, what are you looking at? You know, is it the room beyond, or is it the scene that you can't see? I think that that's particularly interesting.
Yeah, I kind of want to pull that out of
Yeah.
the housing stuff. And let it go wild.
Yeah, I think so. We were trying to do that in a research studio I did last
Yeah, I
year.
remember that.
Yeah, and you know, maybe it needed to be wilder also. But it also was just a student getting used to that. So some of the results were as exciting, I think. But you know, by taking models that are conventional that we know of, like gaming, and like the amount of excitation when you're a first-person shooter trying to figure out who's behind that wall that might shoot back at you. I know that's a low order kind of consideration, but if we think about it in architectural terms, that's kind of the kind of excitation or the kind of provoking quality to move through architecture also. So, you know, you can map it to that and try to, you know, alter it for, you know, not combat purposes or high, you know.
But for manipulation purposes.
Or well, or for ways of making the aesthetics of the architecture, you know, help create certain provocations, you know, wildness or whatever.
Don't take away today.
Anyway, thank you guys.
Thank you.